Well, good afternoon. Now, in the previous class before the break, we were talking about we had talked about libertarianism, and at the end of it, we had talked about what was the problem of libertarianism. Why is it that libertarianism is not the best theory of ethics, maybe? So it is better. It does appear to be better than the utilitarianism, but why it is not the best theory of ethics as such? There has to be something bigger than the consent and liberty also, on the ground of which we can override the consent and liberty also. What is that? This we'll talk about in the next important theory today and the next class also, next day also, tomorrow, next day whenever we have. And that will be Kantianism. So, next important theory that we will talk about is Kantianism, which was, as I told you in my introduction class earlier, was developed by the great German philosopher Immanuel Kant. The great German philosopher Immanuel Kant. So, next important theory that we will be discussing will be the Kantianism by Immanuel Kant. Now, Kantianism, as we will see in our class today and the next day also, that this theory of Kantianism is considered to be perhaps the most important theory of ethics ever developed in the world. So, its impact of Kantian theory is so phenomenal. I had talked about that in my introduction class also, that the impact of this theory is so important that people often say that today you cannot even talk about morality even for 15-20 minutes without talking about some idea whose origin you can find in the Kantian theory. So, without talking about Kantian theory, you cannot even talk about ethics, you cannot even converse about ethics. That is the impact of Kantian theory. Many people say that without understanding the Kantian theory, you do not even understand the meaning and definition of ethics. So, according to such philosophers, such supporters of Kant, that unless and until you have understood the Kantian theory, you do not even know the meaning, not even definition of ethics. So, according to these philosophers, till now we have so many classes we have already taken about ethics. We have talked so much about ethics, various aspects of ethics in a way. But even after all of that, till now, you have not yet understood even the meaning and definition of ethics. Till now, we are just moving in the periphery of ethics. In today's class and the next class, we will go on the core of what exactly ethics is. So, without understanding the Kantian ethics, you don't even understand the meaning of ethics. People often say that today in a way we are living in a Kantian world. So, the whole international at every stage of ethics, well, today's ethics is a Kantian ethics in a way. Whether you talk about individual morality like my personal morality, or you talk about the professional morality like civil service, or you talk about the constitutional morality like Indian constitution, or you talk about international morality today. Today we often say that today our morality is more or less a Kantian morality. So, that is what we often say. So, every stage of morality, today's morality is Kantian morality. That is the impact, that is the influence, that is the importance of the Kantian morality, Kantian theory in today's time. So, that is the importance of Kant. Immanuel Kant is considered to be perhaps the most important phenomenal figure in the history of modern ethics and philosophy. He is such an important figure that we often divide the modern philosophy and ethics into two eras. We often talk about pre-Kantian era and we talk about the post-Kantian era. No other philosopher is given that honor. We do not talk about pre-Bentham and post-Bentham. We do not talk about pre-Mill and post-Mill. We do not talk about pre-Hume and post-Hume, but we always talk about pre-Kant and post-Kant. In Western philosophy, if you look at it, there is only one other philosopher who is given that honor, and he was the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates. So, we often talk about pre-Socratic philosopher and the post-Socratic philosopher. And three philosophers were the Socratic philosopher, the Socrates himself, Plato and the Aristotle. So, we divide ancient Greek philosophy in pre and the post Socratic period, and today we consider modern philosophy is often divided into pre-Kant, and the post-Kantian philosophy. That is the impact, that is the importance of Immanuel Kant in the modern moral philosophy. So after Immanuel Kant, you can see that philosophy and morality never remained the same. There was a significant and fundamental shift that happened in the way we understand morality and philosophy in the modern time after Immanuel Kant. He brought about a sort of fundamental change in the way we look at the philosophy and ethics. There is a philosopher called Not White. He has actually compared Immanuel Kant with the Shiva figure in the Indian mythology. What is the importance of Shiva in a mythology? Indian mythology, Hindu mythology? Well, Shiva, all of you must be aware, Shiva is often considered as the destroyer as well as the creator. Destroyer of the old order and creator of a new order. So, Kant also is considered to be a similar figure in the modern philosophy. He destroyed the old way of looking at life, philosophy and ethics, and he created a new way of looking at the same thing. So, that is the impact, that is the importance of Immanuel Kant in the modern moral philosophy. So, that he himself in his first book that he wrote, I will talk about those books also shortly. In the first book that he wrote, he had actually talked about that I propose to bring about a Copernican revolution in the field of philosophy and ethics. Because Copernicus brought a sort of revolution in our understanding of the universe. Because before Copernicus, Earth was supposed to be the center of the whole universe. And he pushed Earth at the periphery and Sun at the center of the universe. That was a revolution in the way we understand the nature or the universe. Similarly, you can say, so we were at the periphery now, no longer at the center. Now, Immanuel Kant in that sense also he proposed that I am proposing to bring about a similar revolution in the field of philosophy and ethics. Towards the end of the topic, we will talk about also what did he mean by the Copernican revolution and how did he try to propose, how did he propose to bring about such a Copernican revolution here. So, we will talk about all of these things in this class. It is a very important and influential and the interesting theory of ethics also. So, that was Immanuel Kant and his theoretical background. Now, if you look at Immanuel Kant, then before we understand Kantian theory, then it is important for us to understand that what was the intellectual background of Europe when, under which Kantian theory came up. Whenever such a grand theory like Kantianism comes up, then it does not come in the vacuum. So, there is a whole philosophical background that necessitates the emergence of such a grand theory like Kantianism. So, it is not something suddenly a person like Kant comes up and he comes out, he gives a great theory like that. So, it is not like that, it is just as you can see, so there is a whole intellectual background that makes it possible for the emergence of such a great figure. As Newton said, you must have heard that there is a famous quotation of Newton. Newton has said that I was able to see so far only because I was standing on the shoulders of the giants. Who are these giants? These giants were the Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, etc. Had they not been there, then perhaps Newton might not have been able to bring about such a grand theory of physics that he was able to. Similarly, Kant was not the person that had all those predecessors of Kant not been there, then we would not have Immanuel Kant also there. So, he was not a person, it is an idea that became such an important idea at that point of time, which was a culmination of a big controversy that existed in Europe at that time. So, let us talk about that intellectual background of Europe, which necessitated the emergence of the Kantian philosophy. So, we will talk about that, let us think of it. Now, Kant, as as we will see here, that Kant was essentially an 18th century philosopher. So, he was born in 1724 and he died in 1804. So, Kant was essentially a 18th century philosopher, that most of his philosophy was developed in the fourth quarter of 18th century, last 25 years of 18th century. So, that was the time when Kant was the most active person in the field of philosophy, in the field of ethics in a way. So, let us talk about what was the intellectual background of Europe during that period that made Kant to come up as a great theoretician. Now, if you look at Europe in that age, 18th century, then there are two important branches of philosophy was there in 18th century Europe. Two important branches of philosophy, particularly epistemology. Now, epistemology is an important branch of philosophy, just as I told you in my introduction class, just as ethics is an important branch of philosophy. Similarly, epistemology is also, metaphysics is also an important branch, aesthetics also is there, logic also is there, but epistemology is an important branch of philosophy. Now, what is epistemology? Epistemology is often considered as defined as a theory of knowledge. So, whenever we try to think of knowledge, whenever we try to think of knowledge, for example, you can say that anything about knowledge, that what is the meaning of knowledge, what type of knowledge exists, how do we gain the knowledge, which knowledge we can possibly gain, which knowledge we can never gain. If we gain the knowledge, how do we gain the knowledge, how do we store the knowledge in our mind, how do we retrieve the knowledge, how do we make use of the knowledge, how do we make sense of the knowledge. So, whenever you talk about knowledge, then you are essentially doing epistemology. It is a theory of knowledge, it is a science of knowledge, it is a study of knowledge. So, during 18th century, there are two important competing branches of epistemology was there. One was called rationalism and the second was called empiricism. They were the two competing branches. They used to fight with each other in some terms of their conception of knowledge. What was the difference between them? Now, if you look at rationalism, let's talk about philosophers first of all. If you look at rationalism, then first important, in fact, Renaissance began with the rationalist philosopher itself. Renaissance, you must be aware of that. Renaissance is basically the reawakening of Europe. Europe, after the fall of the Roman Empire, for almost 1000 years or so, Europe was virtually in a dark age. So, that there no intellectual activity happened after that, no intellectual, no scientific, nothing was there, virtually in the dark age. Then after suddenly, in around 14th century or 15th century, a sudden spurt of activity was started happening there in every branch of human knowledge. Whether you talk about science or technology or art or culture or literature or the music or painting or sculpture. So, in every branch of human activity, geographical exploration, every branch of human activity, a spurt of activity started happening. This spurt of activity that started happening then is known as Renaissance, sort of reawakening of Europe. Europe was sleeping in a dark age, it was reawakened by these philosophers. These philosophers, these thinkers, these activists, these explorers, etc. So, that was the beginning of, you can say, a new age in the world history in a way. So, that is called Renaissance. So, initial Renaissance philosophers were, most of them were rationalist philosophers. People like René Descartes, for example, the first rationalist philosopher may be René Descartes, Baruch Spinoza, for example, or Leibniz. Most importantly was Leibniz. Kant was strongly influenced by Leibniz's idea. So, they were the rationalist philosopher, like you can see Descartes, Spinoza or Leibniz, etc. The competing philosophy on the other hand was empiricism. That most important empirical philosophers were people like, you can say, Francis Bacon, for example, or John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, or most importantly David Hume, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill. They were all, we have already seen these people's idea, Thomas Hobbes or Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, etc. So, David Hume also was there, Francis Bacon was the first important one perhaps. So, they were the empiricist philosophers in a way. So, the two competing branch of knowledge was there, or philosophy was there. What was the difference between the two? Now, rationalist philosophers believed, rationalist philosophers like, for example, René Descartes or Spinoza or most importantly Leibniz, they thought that human mind, if you look at it, human mind had certain innate ideas. Human mind has certain innate ideas. What is the meaning of the term innate ideas? Innate ideas are those ideas which are already there in our mind since the birth itself. We don't learn them. They are already there inside us and they are there with the since the birth itself, innate, since birth. But these ideas which are there in our mind, it is encrypted. So, how do we decrypt that? In order to decrypt that, in order to know that, our mind has a special ability. and that ability is called reason. So when we apply this reason on our innate ideas, then what comes out is the knowledge. Knowledge. So what is knowledge? Knowledge is the result of the application of reason on the innate ideas which our mind already has. So that is how the knowledge comes up. In order to gain the knowledge, you don't have to go out in the world. How do you gain the knowledge? Well, sit quietly, close your eyes and look inside. Apply your own reason. All the knowledge is already there in your mind. So mind is the repository of all the knowledge. Only thing is that you have to look inward and look at that, read that. That is what we can say rationalist philosophers believe. Empirical philosophers, on the other hand, they had just opposite conception of knowledge. They thought that human mind has nothing called innate idea. They do not believe in the concept of the innate idea, existence of the innate ideas. They said, for example, that human mind is a type of tabula rasa. Some of you may have heard this term, tabula rasa. This phrase was used, it is an old Latin phrase, but it was in the modern philosophy. First of all, this phrase was used by John Locke. I briefly mentioned him in my previous class also, that life, liberty and property, inalienable right of life, liberty and property. So this term tabula rasa was first of all used by John Locke, the British philosopher. And then after, this term became very famous in the modern, almost any empirical philosophers often use the term tabula rasa. What is the meaning of the term tabula rasa? Tabula rasa essentially means a blank slate. Blank slate. So according to them, human mind is like a blank slate. At the time of birth, nothing is written over it. No knowledge is there with us at the time of birth. If knowledge is not, nothing is there in our mind at the birth, how do we gain the knowledge? Well, in order to gain the knowledge, they said, empirical philosopher, that we have certain sense organs, and through that sense organs, well, we make certain experience. We make certain observation, and once we make experience of observation, then only our mind is capable of applying itself on that. And when mind applies on that, then after, well, what comes out is the knowledge. And this knowledge is written on the blank slate which our mind is. So in order, how do you gain the knowledge? In order to gain the knowledge, your mind cannot do anything on its own. So don't trust your mind. Go out in the world and experience the world, observe the world, and well, study the world. So only then you study the world through the sense organs and all, then only your mind can make sense of that. Otherwise, mind is incapable of making sense of the thing. In order to work, mind needs data. Only on that data it can possibly apply. Otherwise, mind is incapable of telling you anything. There is nothing in the mind otherwise. So you must start observing, and then only the knowledge comes up. It is something like this. Suppose, for example, you make an observation that if you heat water up to 100 degrees centigrade, then it will start boiling. You make that observation, and you make that observation a number of times. Then after that, if you make that observation a number of times, then perhaps your mind can possibly tell you that whenever this happens, it is always followed by that. And whenever that happens, it is always preceded by that. Then perhaps your mind can tell you that, well, this is the cause and this is the effect. So, and that is what we call the knowledge. But before this knowledge, you can gain only and only when we make the observation. So that is what they say, that this is how to gain. So in order to gain the knowledge, you need to observe, you need to experiment, you need to experience the world. Experience must be the beginning of the process of acquisition of knowledge. So this is what they say. Sense organs are important here. They, on the other hand, rationalist philosopher, they did not believe in the idea of the sense organ. They thought that sense organs are always deceptive. They often give you, they said, rationalist philosopher, that they say that sense organs often give you deceptive and illusory knowledge, wrong knowledge, you cannot trust. Suppose, for example, your sense organ might tell you that there is water there, and if you go there, there won't be any water. It is mirage. So in this case, your sense organ is telling you there is water, but water is not there. You will be deceived if you trust your sense organ. Your sense organ tells you that earth is flat, but your reason tells you that no, earth is round. Whom do you trust more? You trust your reason, you don't trust your sense organ. sense organ tells you that sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Your region tells you no, sun does not rise, sun does not set. That is deceptive. It is earth that moves, and the revolution of the earth gives an appearance of rising and setting sun. Whom do you trust? You don't trust your sense organ, you trust your region. So region is more reliable, sense organs are unreliable. They often gives us wrong information, false information, deceptive information, changing information. You cannot trust them. As in India also we say that the external world is a illusion, Moh Maya, something like this one, Maya. The world is a Maya, world is an illusion according to them. So that worldly knowledge is always unreliable, untrustworthy, you can never trust that. Only thing that you can trust is something that is there in your mind, that is the real knowledge, that is true knowledge, that is the reliable knowledge. So this is what these people believe. So in a way we can see that both of them, well, this rationalist philosopher followed a top-down approach. Knowledge begins with the mind, and they followed a bottom-up approach. Knowledge begins with the sense organ, bottom. This is how the two were just opposite of each other in that sense. That was the conception of the world according to these people. Now at the time when Kant was there in 18th century, then these empirical philosophers were very strong and influential philosophers. We have already seen the impact of such people like John Locke, or you can say Jeremy Bentham, Thomas Hobbes, and Francis Bacon. I did not talk about him, or you can say David Hume. Most importantly, they were extremely influential philosophers. Not only that, that this empirical emphasis on the observation and experience, etc., had led to the development of modern experimental science. Because empirical people say that don't sit quietly, go out and see the world. And that was the time when Europeans had started going out. And they knew that world is so large, so vast and all. So they discovered the whole, you can say they circumnavigated the whole of Africa to reach India, for example, you know. They discovered all new world in America, for example, geographical discovery, scientific discovery. So many new discovery happened, experimental science. So that was the time when it appeared that observation experience is more important, mind is not that important. So that was the time when you can say these people were on the rise. This is what something that has gave rise to what we call empirical science. Today also we talk about empirical science. What is the meaning of the term empirical science? Well, empirical science is the science in which, well, which is always based on observation and data. So who are the empirical scientists and all? Suppose, for example, you tell me something, you give me a conclusion, then I will not trust your conclusion unless and until, well, you support your conclusion with data. So whenever you make a conclusion, then you must support our conclusion on the basis of experiment, data, fact, information. Then only that can be trusted. And you must collect fact for that. As Americans often say that in God we trust. For everything else we need data. So only God is something on which you can trust, but everything else, if you say something, give me data first, otherwise we will not trust you. So this focus on data, collection of data, fact, etc., is basically empirical focus. That is empirical idea. And that was the time when empirical science has made lots and lots of new invention, discovery, etc. So it appeared that empiricism was a good theory and rationalism was a comparatively bad theory. It was under this background that Immanuel Kant came up. First of all, what he tried to do in his philosophy, that he tried in his, you can say the epistemology, which has implication for ethics also, as we will see. What he did first of all, that he tried to first of all make a compromise between the two. He said that rationalists are right, but not 100%. Empiricists are also right, but not 100%. Both of them are partially right. Remember, both of them claim to be only right. That he suggested that no, both of them are partially right. So in order to have a complete conception of human knowledge, we have to put both of them together in one systematic. This is how he synthesized everything together. So he tried to find out what is the problem in these people and what is the problem. He destroyed rationalist also and he destroyed the empiricist also, and he combined both of them together to create a new understanding of new conception of what human mind is. How did he try to combine the two? Let's briefly talk about that also. What he said, first of all, suppose for example, it is the external world, outside reality. So he said first of all that about external world through the sense organ, first of all we make certain observation, we make certain experience, and after that suppose this is our mind. After that our mind applies on that reason. and whatever comes out of that is what he calls the knowledge. Remember, rationalist people say that only this matters, nothing else matters. It is totally false. And empiricists say that no, this only matters, that is not. So knowledge is only this. They say that knowledge is only that. But Kant say that no, knowledge is a combination of both of that. So in order to gain the knowledge, first of all, we have to make an observation, no doubt about that. But that observation in itself is meaningless. That observation becomes meaningful only and only when we impose our reason on that. So raw data that comes from the sense organ is meaningless. Meaning is always provided by the mind. Remember, meaning comes from that. Data comes from here, meaning comes from that. So meaningful information that we get, understandable knowledge that we gain about the world is always through that. He called world, external world as it exists outside us. He called that as, you don't have to remember that word, but he called that as noumena, and the knowledge that we gain about the world, he called that as phenomena. Both of these two are the Greek word, ancient Greek word, noumena and phenomena, but he was the person who made these two terms popular in the modern philosophy and modern knowledge. Noumena means what? Noumena is the world as it is. And world as it is impossible for us to know. You can never know the world as it is, reality as it is. Phenomena is what? Phenomena is the world as it appears to us, reality as it appears to us through our reason. So that is called phenomena. Phenomena is the only thing that we are capable of knowing. Phenomena is beyond our comprehension, beyond our reach. Only phenomena is within our reach, within our comprehension, within our understanding in a way. So, and reason, if you look at it, different people have different reason, and because of that, same world outside appears different to different people. That is a very important thing about ethics, as we will see later. So same event in the world appears very different from each other because of the reason that we have. It is something like this. Reason in that sense is something like a glass on our eyes. Reason is more like glass on our eyes in a way. Is there some question relevant? So, region in this sense, if you look at it, then region is more like a glass that we wear on our eyes. You know that when we wear the red glass in our eyes, then well, the whole world will appear red to us. When we wear the blue glass on our eyes, the same world becomes blue to us. When we wear the green glass on our eyes, same world becomes green to us. So this is what region is. Suppose, for example, just think of it. This is a very important thing about ethics in a way. Suppose, for example, well, if you can say there is a child, for example, and at the time of birth itself, suppose you put a glass on his eye, red glass. Then as he will grow up, he will see the whole world as red only. Now, can he ever make out that what the actual real color of the world is? He can never make it out. What he can be 100% sure of, he can be 100% sure of is that the world appears red to me. If I have blue eyes on my glass on my eyes, then what I can be 100% sure of is that the world appears blue to me. Whether the world is blue or not, we can never know. But one thing we can 100% be sure that, well, the world appears blue to me. So that is what we, so this is what he says, and that has an important implication for ethics also. So that is what you can say the Kant will try to say. It has an important implication for philosophy, as we will see, ethics also, as we will see later on. So this is what he talked about, phenomena and the phenomenal world and the noumenal world. World as it is, beyond our reach, world as appears to us, well, different for different people, and that is what we can possibly know. That is the knowable part of the knowledge. So that is what he tried to do. So this was what Immanuel Kant's main focus was. Now, if you look at Immanuel Kant personally, then as I told you that he was born in 1724 in a small city called Königsberg, that was in eastern Prussia at that time, a port city, a small port city, but very active city. Where so Königsberg was the name of that city. Today this city is in Russia and known as Kaliningrad. But in philosophy, we know that city, that town as Königsberg. So he was born in a small, you can say, East Prussian city town called Königsberg in 1724. And exactly 80 years later, he died in 1804 in the same town, Königsberg itself. And the most interesting thing that I personally find about this person was that he lived for 80 years. And during all these 80 years, he did not move beyond the 20 kilometers from the place where he was born. So suppose for example, this was the place where he was born, Throughout the 20 years, he did not go beyond 20 kilometers from his place. His whole life was spent just in the radius of 20 kilometers. It is only once that he went as far as 80 kilometers from the place, when he went to a neighboring village as a private tutor for some financial purpose. Except for that one incident, when he went as far as 80 kilometers, he never moved beyond the 20 kilometers from his place. That was the type of quiet, calm, peaceful, immobile life that he lived. So, and we are the people, on the other hand, you know, that we have in Delhi, we have extended weekend and we go to Kulu and Manali for our holidays. And here was a person who lived for 80 years and he did not move beyond 20 kilometers from the place where he was born. So that was the type of life that, and it was consistent with his philosophy, that in order to know the world, you don't have to go into the world. Sitting in your own room itself, you can know the human nature, you can know the world, and you can change the world, you can shape the world also. This is what exactly he did there. Now, the idea of is that, so as you can appreciate from this whole life that he had, well, he got all his education in the University of Königsberg itself. And after completing his education, he was appointed in the same University of Königsberg as a lecturer. Initially, he was appointed as an unsalaried lecturer, where he was not paid any fixed salary. He was paid money on the basis of the number of students who attended his class. And he was a charismatic lecturer, one of the greatest lecturer, most popular lecturer perhaps in the history of philosophy. Charismatic lecturer. Large number of students from throughout Europe used to come to attend his lectures. And he used to give lectures on a wide range of topics, including physics, astronomy. He was a great physicist. He was a great supporter of Newton, Sir Isaac Newton. He was a great astronomer. He was the person actually who applied Newton's theory of gravitation into astronomy. And he was the person who first of all proposed the nebular theory of the formation of the stars. That he made this proposal, the stars might have been formed by the cloud of dust which came closer to each other, and you can say because of gravity. This theory we still believe in about the star formation and also. He was the first person who proposed that nebular theory of physics, star formation. So he was a great physicist. He used to give lectures on physics, astronomy, biology, anthropology, geography, physical geography most importantly, epistemology, metaphysics, logic, aesthetics, and most importantly ethics. Every branch of knowledge he used to give lectures on that, and in all these branches of knowledge he had made some important contribution. So for example, almost 100 years before Charles Darwin, he had made a proposal, he had made a proposal of a theory, he had proposed a theory of something like evolution. He had made a proposal that human beings might have evolved from other animal through a process similar to natural selection. He did not have the data to prove his theory which Darwin had, but he had proposed similar idea almost 100 years before Charles Darwin also. So in every branch of these knowledges, well, he had made some important contribution there. So that was the type of, you can say, lectures he used to give. Almost every subject he used to give lectures, and his lectures were extremely popular. That large number of people used to come to attend his lecture. It was said about him that his lecture used to start at 7 o'clock in the morning, and if you have to attend his lecture, then you must reach the classroom almost 1.5 hours earlier. Only then you will get a seat in the classroom. Otherwise, you will have to sit outside, or you can say watch from the periphery itself. That was the type of popularity that his lectures had. Now initially he was quite happy just in his lectures. He was quite happy just in his lectures, or you can say students and study itself. He had no desire to write any books. So initially he did not write any books of any substance. It is said that at around 46 years of age, he read a book by David Hume. David Hume, the treatise on human nature, in which Hume has proposed an extreme form of empirical philosophy. Reading this book, Kant was quite disturbed. He has written in his autobiography that reading this book by Hume shook me out of my intellectual slumber. That I was sleeping intellectually till then, and this person shook me out. What are you doing? These people are misunderstanding philosophy and you are sleeping like this. Then after he got up from that slumber, and for next 10 years he went into a type of hibernation, complete withdrawal from the worldly activity, and kept on thinking about what philosophy is, what is the metaphysics, epistemology, human mind, nature, etc. And then at the age of 56, at the 56 years of age, he wrote his first book. Think of it, 56 years of age, he wrote his first book. Remember that was a time when people were intellectually very active. That John Stuart Mill had written his first book at the age of 11. David Hume had written his first book at the age of 23, his rival. And here was a person who wrote his first book at the age of 56. And this book that he wrote became perhaps the most important book ever written in the history of philosophy. Name of that book was The Critique of Pure Reason. So this book became the most important book, and anybody who knows ethics of modern philosophy, ask that person that tell me the name of one book that changed the way we understand philosophy in the modern time, then it will be Immanuel Kant, first critique of Immanuel. He wrote two more critiques as we will talk about. So almost anybody will say that it will be the first critique of Immanuel Kant. So this book became, in this book actually he had proposed to bring about that Copernican revolution. So that was the book that he wrote that created a storm in the field of philosophy in a way, that destroying the old order and creating a new way of looking at the knowledge and human mind. That is what he did, first book. After a few years he read a book by, well, Jeremy Bentham, in which Bentham has proposed an extreme form of consequentialism. Reading this book again, Kant was quite disturbed that what this person is doing, he is misunderstanding ethics. As a response to that book, he wrote his second book, that is called The Groundwork. Groundwork for a Metaphysics of Morals. Groundwork for a Metaphysics of Morals, mostly it is known as the Groundwork. Now, this book became perhaps the most important book ever written in the history of ethics. So, ask anybody that tell me the name of one book of ethics that changed the way we understand ethics in the modern world, then it will be the Groundwork of Immanuel Kant. So, this is what, so it changed the way we understand ethics. We will see most of our class will be based on the Groundwork itself. Then after, he wrote a second critique also, the Critique of Practical Reason. So Critique of Practical Reason was basically an extension of the Groundwork. It was also a book on ethics. First book was a book on metaphysics and epistemology. Second book and third book, both of them were a book on ethics. So in the Practical Reason, he expanded the work of Groundwork, ideas of Groundwork. Then after, he wrote a fourth critique also, the Critique of Judgment. So this was basically a book on aesthetics, study of beauty. So beauty is an interesting thing, you all know that beauty is very personal and cultural also. Same person, you know, can be extremely beautiful in Nigeria and that person will not be beautiful in India at all. Somebody who is beautiful in India may not be beautiful in China or America. So beauty is a very, you can say, keeps on changing. From where this sense of beauty comes up in our mind. So this is what he tried to establish, study in that case. He started the study of beauty as a subject. He is the founder of aesthetics in that sense. So that was a study of beauty, Critique of Judgment. Then after, he wrote many other books. I will talk about these books also during the course that we are going to develop here. So That was the idea of Immanuel. These are the books of Immanuel Kant. If you look at these books that he had written, each book created lots and lots of impact on the way we understand philosophy, ethics, on whatever topic that he touched. Now, if you look at his original books that he wrote, then you will see his original books were very difficult to read, very difficult books they are. So difficult it is that there are many stories about long sentence, very difficult word, jargon. He is perhaps has the record of writing the longest sentence in the history of philosophy. One sentence he had written, there was 246-47 words. That long sentence he used to write. Very complex sentence formation, one full paragraph, long sentence, very difficult jargons and all, very difficult to read. He is known in history of philosophy as writing the difficult books. So difficult his books were that so many stories are also about their books. There is a story about him, there is an incident about him, that when he wrote his first critique, then initially his books were quite, offending to the church. These people often had a fight with the church at that time. So once it so happened that the church complained to the king of Prussia that Kant is writing such an offensive books and all, please ban all his books. Now the king asked his education minister that please go and ban all the books of Kant. Now the education minister, who was perhaps sympathetic of Kant, he told his king, oh sir, don't worry about Kant, because 90% of the people will not read him, and the 10% people who will read him will not understand him. And on that ground, his books were not banned. So he said that most of the people will never bother about what he is writing, and those people who can possibly, they will never understand what he is writing. So there is no point banning his books. That was the basis on which his books were not banned. There is another story about him, that when he wrote his first critique, then he sent a manuscript of that critique to one of his friends, another great philosopher of that time called Hertz, and for a peer review. And the story is that this second philosopher returned his book after reading half with a note that I refuse to read your book, fearing insanity for myself, that I will become mad if I read your book. What have you written? That was the type of complexity of that book that he had written. Somebody asked him that why do you write in such a complex manner? Why do you write in such a complex manner? Why do you not simplify your ideas? Why do you not make it simpler or give more explanation, give more examples, etc.? To which he said that I write in such a complex manner because of two reasons. First of all, I am writing my books for other philosophers, not for the common people like us. So I am writing my books for other philosophers who are intelligent enough to understand what I want to say, and they can explain it further to the people in a common language. That is one reason. But more importantly, he said that I am writing my book in such a complex manner because I want to keep my book short and precise. And in that short and precise form, his first book ran into 800 pages. 800 pages, short and precise form. Now you can imagine how complex his ideas were. So had it been explained further, perhaps it might have been 3000 pages maybe. So that was the complexity of his ideas, his belief, you can say words, his writing, etc. was. So I have given you the name of his books, but never try to read his books. So if you try to understand Kantian theory by reading his groundwork, then you will hate ethics on that day. It will be too difficult, so difficult for you to make sense of. So I will try to make it as simple as possible in my class, but remember his ideas are very complex, his books are even more complex. In fact, Will Durant has written that if you want to understand Immanuel Kant, then Kant's original book should be the last book that you should read. Read all other books written on Kant, then perhaps you will get the intellectual ability to understand his original books. Never read that book. So never try to read his books, but his ideas are very important. His ideas are so important that there was a post-Kantian philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. He had said, there is an interesting quotation that he had said, that he said that a person is a child unless and until he has not understood the Kantian philosophy, Kantian theory. So according to Arthur Schopenhauer, well, you all are children till today. So today and next class, you will become an adult. Welcome to adulthood. And without understanding this idea, this theory, you might not even become adult according to these people. This is the importance of this theory, but it's a very difficult theory. Let us try to See, so that was the whole intellectual life of Immanuel Kant, his work. Now, if you look at the whole of his philosophy, then you can see Kantian theory philosophy can be summarized in a single phrase, whole of philosophy that we are going to explore in the rest of the classes. Whole theory of Kant was based on just this principle, that think before you act. Think before you act. So, think before you act. So, in this case you can see that everything, he believed that every action that you perform, it must be preceded by a proper thought. Nothing. So, our action is should not be on the basis of intuition, impulse, habit, influence of others. You must always think before you act. We will see in our class today and the next class what is the meaning of that thinking here. But this is what is the idea that he proposed. Not only that, he proposed the idea of think before you act, he actually, lived whole of his life on the basis of similar principle of think before you act. And because of that, his life also was very unusual life. That he was, in his personal life, if you look at it, he was a highly conscientious person, extremely organized, extremely punctual. Every day, exactly at 5 o'clock he used to get up, had his, you can say, break for 2 cups of coffee, read newspaper, go to his college to give lectures at 7 o'clock. At 11 o'clock his lecture was complete. He used to go in libraries to study for some time. At 1 o'clock he used to have lunch, one time meal every day. 1 o'clock he used to have a lunch, and every day on the lunch 5 people were invited, only 5 people, not more, not less. And everybody's name was put on the table where who has to sit here, there, where. And every day the topic of discussion for the lunch was predetermined. That on this day, today we will discuss on this topic or that topic. At the end of the lunch, everybody has to say a joke. Lunch must end with laughter. That was the idea. So, every day at 3 o'clock, he used to go, in the afternoon 3 o'clock, he used to go for a walk, 15 minutes walk. And exactly at 3 o'clock. And he was so regular for his daily walk that the people in Königsberg used to set their watch by seeing Immanuel Kant. That if Kant was passing through your gate, then it must be 3:11. It cannot be 3:10 or 3:12. So, that was the town clock owner of, you can say, Königsberg used to set their clock by looking at it. Kant has come out of his eyes, it must be 3 o'clock. Kant was clock in Königsberg. So, that was a type of regularity that throughout his life, only one day in his life, he broke his routine for a daily walk. On that day, he was reading a book of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who has a strong influence on his ideas, the Social Contract. Reading this book, he became so involved in that he thought that I must complete this book today itself. So, he broke his routine of a walk. But except for that one single day, throughout his life, he never broke his routine. Every day, exactly at 3 o'clock, he used to go for a walk for 15 minutes, accompanied by a servant who used to carry an umbrella with him, so that if there is a rain, then he should not, then also that should not break his routine. Routine must be maintained. So, that was a type of organized and systematic and punctual life that he had lived. But I believe sometimes that he overdid this thinking part maybe, because one important consequence of this thinking was that he, like many other philosophers, he did not marry throughout his life. He was not against marriage, unlike Bentham. Bentham made a cost-benefit analysis maybe. He did not. He was strongly against cost-benefit analysis as the basis of moral act. We'll see later on why not. But then also he was a strong supporter of the institution of marriage. In fact, in this theory, we will also talk about the moral basis of marriage, sex, etc. That is a part of his theory. So, he was a supporter of marriage, but still he could not marry. Twice it is said that he planned to marry. The story is that twice he planned to marry. Once he selected a girl also, but he must think before he acts. So, he took so much of time to think that whether to propose or not, when to propose, how to propose, where to propose. By this time, the girl married someone else, a more courageous person maybe. The story is that he took 6 years to think about that. 6 years he kept on thinking, should I propose or not. After 6 years, he finally decided that, I must marry this girl is a girl of my dream. Then after, he went to her house with a proposal to marry, and he met her father and told her father that I want to marry your daughter. The girl's father looked at her with a very strange and you can say, well, winked eye, and told him, okay, you can go and ask that lady herself, that it is her life and only she can make a decision. But she is living on right now, she is on this address. He gave him address, please go there and meet her and ask her. Now Kant went on that address, and when he met that lady, then he saw that this lady was already a mother of 2 children, and that devastated him in a way emotionally. Then after he selected a second girl also to marry. This time also he took so much of time to think, not 6 years maybe, but then also he took so much of time to think that before he could make a proposal, well, this girl, well, her father was transferred out of the city and she left the city, and Kant never left the city. After that, he gave up the idea of marriage altogether, and he devoted the whole of his life just to the philosophy, ethics, knowledge, etc. So that was the life of Immanuel Kant, an interesting person, an extremely influential philosopher. So that was his life, his work, his intellect in a way. Now let us talk about what was his idea. Now write down a few lines firstly. According to Kant, the only thing that differentiates the human beings from non-humans the only thing that differentiates the human beings from non-humans is our rationality. Only thing that differentiates the human beings from non-humans is our rationality, that is the ability to reason. That is the ability to reason. Now, that is the first important assertion that he makes. He says here that what is it, first of all he asked this question, what is it that makes us different from other animal? And he found biologically there is not much difference between us and biologically we all have the organs which other animals also have, like brain, heart, kidney, etc. Biologically we are just like other animals, particularly the higher animals like primates. Only thing that is different in us is that we can use the reason and other animals cannot. So if you remove reason, then well, qualitatively there won't be any difference between the humans and the non-humans. So human being, what is a human being? Any other animal plus rationality. If you remove rationality, then we are just like any other animal. So that is the first assertion that he makes. Further, second one, write down. He also believed that there are some supreme principles of morality. He also believed that there are some supreme principles of morality which are so universal there are some supreme principles of morality which are so universal that they hold for or they are true for that they hold for the whole of humanity and at all the times. That they hold for the whole of humanity at all the times. At all the times. So this is the second assertion he makes. He says that there are some supreme principles of morality which are so important, so fundamental that they are true for the complete all of humanity at all the time. He was of this opinion that law of morality must be universal. So if there is a law of morality which can tell you what is right in for me but not for you, that is not morality. Which tells you right in the classroom but not in the market is not morality. What tells you right today but not tomorrow is not morality. Morality must be universal. What is right for one person in one situation must be right for everybody in the world in the same situation. What is wrong for one person in one situation must be wrong for everybody in the world in the same situation. So that is what he will talk about. He said morality must be, law of morality must be universal as the law of nature. So this is what he said. In this sense, you can see he was very strongly influenced by Sir Isaac Newton maybe. Now, can you tell me what was the most important contribution of Newton in the field of knowledge? Now, this is an interesting thing that when I ask this question in my class, then most of the students say that the greatest contribution of Newton was the law of gravity or law of motion or invention of calculus, etc., etc. No, that was not the great invention. You can say greatest contribution of Newton. It is unfortunate that many students, science students also do not know what was the greatest contribution of Sir Isaac Newton in the field of knowledge. The most important contribution of field of Sir Isaac Newton in the field of knowledge was that he was the person who made can say law of nature universal, because before him it was thought law of nature is always particular. Even Galileo, for example, Galileo also talked about gravity, you must be aware, but Galileo thought that law of nature is different on the earth and is different on the heaven. So if this marker falls down on the towards the earth, it is because of a different law of nature, and if the moon revolves around the earth, then that is because of the different law of nature. So law of nature is different on the earth and it is different in the heavens, in the sky. So this is what people used to think, but Newton said that no, law of nature is universal. Same law of nature makes this marker to fall down, and same law of nature makes the a moon to revolve around the earth and earth towards the sun and sun in the Milky Way. So law of nature does not differentiate between whether you are on the earth or you are in the heaven. Law of nature is universal. This concept of universality of the law of nature is the greatest contribution, or was the greatest contribution of Newton. You know, a few years ago, I had watched a film, Hindi film, some of you may have seen that or you can watch that, Newton. Name of the film itself is Newton. Now, Newton is a story of a young man, role played by Rajkumar Rao. Now, he is going for some election duty, and when his boss asked, what is your name? Then he said, my name is Newton Kumar. I was surprised, Newton Kumar, what is the name? What's that name? Then he asked me, how did you get the Newton Kumar name? He said that my parents have named me Newton Kumar. But Newton is a girl's name, so people often used to make fun of me. So I decided to change my name. I made Nu into New and Tan into Tan. So Newton became Newton, Newton Kumar. Then his boss started laughing. And then after he asked him that, do you know what was the biggest contribution of Newton in the for the humanity maybe? Of course, like most of you, he also did not know. Then his boss told him that what is the most important contribution? Newton's greatest contribution was that, and this word is very important that he used in Hindi. He said that greatest contribution of Newton was that Newton ne zameen asman ko ek kar diya. He made the earth and the sky one. That is a very interesting way to say the same thing. Earlier sky was something else, law of nature, and earth was something else, but Newton made both of them same. In morality, this is what Kant did. Because earlier what happened everywhere in the world, that morality was different for different people. In India, you know that different law of morality applied on the Shudra, people who were lower, and different law of morality applied on the Brahmins who were above. In Europe also, different law of morality applied for the serf, and different law of morality applied for the feudal lord. For slave, a different law was there, and for the masters, a different law was there. For a black, different law was there, and for a white, different law was there. So law depended on who you are. In India, if you are a Brahman, then for same crime, you will be given different punishment, and if you are a Shudra, then you will give a different punishment. So law was always dependent on the person, who that person is. But Kant said that no, morality cannot be like that. Morality must be universal like the law of nature. That earth and the sky must be same. Shudra and Brahman must be same in the eye of the morality. The black and white must be same in the eye of morality. The serf and the lord must be same in the eye of morality. Morality cannot make a difference between who you are. Right is always right regardless of condition. Wrong is always wrong for everyone. That is the nature of morality that he tried to discover. Law of morality must be as universal as the law of nature. So what Newton did to the physics, nature, well, Kant tried to do that for morality. Newton universalized the law of nature and Kant universalized the law of morality. This was the project of Immanuel Kant. So this is the meaning of this point that we have written, that there are some supreme principles of morality which are so universal that they are true for the whole of humanity at all the time, in all the situations, for all the person. Write down further. It is through our rationality that, it is because of our rationality that we can both identify and follow It is because of our rationality that we can both identify and follow these principles of morality. We can both identify and follow these principles of morality. So, this is the next important. He said that it is through this rationality that we can both identify as well as to follow these principles of morality as well. So, in his theory, as we will see throughout the course here, that the rationality and morality is the same thing. He said that being rational and being moral is one and the same thing. The moment you are rational, being irrational and being immoral is also one and the same thing. The moment you are rational, you are already moral. So, and the moment you are moral, you are already rational. You cannot be rational and immoral, and you cannot be moral and irrational. Morality and rationality always go together. So, in his theory, the only thing that you have to do is to become rational, and the moment you are rational, well, morality is a natural consequence of that, natural corollary of that, natural correlate of that. You cannot be rational and immoral. Be rational, that is it. Morality is already there. So, that is what was his. So, his theory is, that's why I told you earlier also that his theory is a rational theory of ethics. His theory is just about rationality. What does it mean to be rational, and how can we become rational? That is the idea of Immanuel Kant that we will try to explore here. Now, write down further. Change the paragraph, then after write further. Kantian theory can be understood in terms of three concepts. But before that, let us take a few questions are there. Ohm. Sir, according to libertarians, child marriage can also be done if both parties consent to do so. No, Ohm. Child marriage cannot be done because children are below the age of consent. So, liberty applies only after the age of consent. But after age of consent, well, there should not be any restriction on who can marry whom. Next question. Russia is a socialist country, then still how it is in the top of the most unequal country in the world list as per reports published by Oxfam last year. Oxfam. And Russia is no longer a socialist country, first of all. Russia has oligarchy country. So, Russian oligarchs are extremely rich. So, let us not go into that why it is so, but Russia, first of all, is no longer a socialist country, and secondly, it is oligarchic. Oligarchs are extremely rich and there are a number of people extremely poor. Next question, Braja. Sir, why we follow European philosopher, not Indian philosopher like Chanakya, Aristotle? Because of that, European culture and their thinking is slightly different from us. Braja, I already answered this question in the previous class. Did you not hear that? So, don't ask the same question 10 times. Indeed. So, this question we have asked earlier in the previous class also and one earlier class also. Let us not waste our time in repeating the answer to the same question. We can, well, try to focus on what we are discussing. Indeed. This is what your syllabus says. We are preparing for UPSC exam. You are not preparing for what you like or what I like. Isn't it? So, our syllabus tells us that these things have to be studied. Questions will be from these things. That is it. So, don't try to be ideological Indian or nothing. I have answered this question at least 2-3 times during the course. So, don't I can say fall into that thing. Let us focus what we are doing. We are doing a syllabus. So, whatever your syllabus is there, we are doing only that. We are preparing for UPSC exam, means for which we have a syllabus prepared by UPSC. Question will be asked from these topics and only these answers you have to write there. If you want to clear the UPSC exam, that is it. So write down further. A Kantian theory can be understood in three parts. In terms of three concepts. Again, remember at the root center of Kantian theory there is only one single concept is there. But for the sake of simplicity, I will divide that into three parts. First one is, write down, freedom. First one is freedom. Write down a few lines. Okay, first of all, one minute. Leave this line as it is. We will write something else later on this line. Change the paragraph and then after write from here. Write down, an act can be moral. An act can be moral only and only an act can be moral only and only when it is freely chosen by us. An act can be moral only and only when it is freely chosen by us. Now, that is the first important thing, the starting point of moral discussion, that it is not Kant who is talking about. Almost anybody who thinks about morality, they always think about in a similar manner, that without freedom, morality is a meaningless concept. Only when freedom is there, morality becomes, well, meaningful in a way. What is the meaning of the term freedom? Freedom simply means, suppose for example, at one point of time you have two choices in front of you, say A and B. You can do A also and you can do B also, but you decide to do A rather than B, then your choice would be a free choice. But suppose if there is no second choice, only A can be done by you, then in that case you have no freedom. So freedom means how many choice you have, what else you can do. If there is a else also, then what you do is a free choice. If there is no else, then there is no freedom. So suppose for example, if you take this classroom for example, now physical classroom. Now before the class started, then first a student who entered the classroom, well, that student will have maximum freedom because that student could have sat on any of the chair. And the last student who entered the classroom will have no freedom because least freedom, because that student can sit only on the rest of the chair which is there. So that is the freedom there. Now freedom and morality is very closely related to each other. How come? Think of it. Suppose for example there is a robot and somebody programs the robot in such a manner that this robot goes and kills somebody. Now this robot has killed somebody, but do you think that this robot is morally responsible for the death of that person? Of course not. Why not? Because the robots are not free. So robot is programmed in such a manner that it can only kill the other person. It cannot decide not to kill the other person. So it has no choice but to kill. So it had led to the killing, but moral responsibility is not there. The programmer is responsible because programmer had the freedom to program the robot or not to program the robot. But instead of not programming the robot, programmer decided to program it. Because of that, programmer is responsible, robot is not. Second example, dogs are faithful, but are they moral? There is no morality in the dog. Why not? Because they say dogs are faithful because of their nature. Millions of years of evolution has shaped them in such a manner that they can only be faithful. They cannot be unfaithful. They will die but will not be unfaithful. So they are faithful but not moral. We on the other hand, when we become faithful, then that can be a moral act because we are capable of becoming unfaithful also. So instead of becoming unfaithful, we decide to become faithful. Because of that, our faithfulness will be a moral act and dogs will not be a moral act. So this is a very simple. If you look at morality in a deeper manner, then you will realize that morality and freedom is very closely related to each other. That is a well-known fact. Every moral philosopher talks about that. But, write down further. But Kantian idea of freedom, the Kantian idea of freedom is a very complex, the Kantian idea of freedom is a very complex and demanding idea. The Kantian idea of freedom is a very complex and demanding idea. Is a very complex and demanding idea. So that is the important thing further, that freedom, everybody thinks about freedom as a precondition of morality, but the way Kant defined freedom was a very new way of understanding what freedom actually means. So it's a complex idea, it's a demanding idea. So, but let us try to see what exactly Kant meant by freedom. Now, in order to understand the freedom of Kant, let us take some examples. Think about these examples and tell me what do you think is moral or not. First example is a little textbook example, but let's take that. Suppose, for example, there is a very tall building, 100-storied building, Empire State Building. Now, from the roof of that building, suppose there is a person who is somehow falling. And when he falls on the ground, then in a very bizarre turn of event, he happens to fall on the second person standing on the ground, and this second person died. Now, his act of falling has led to the death of this second person, but do you think that this first person is responsible for the death of this second person? Perhaps all of you will say no. Why not? Now, some student in my class say that he is not responsible, sir, because he does not have the intention to kill that person. But here we will say that no, intention does not come here. Intention does not matter. Intention will come only later. Here he is not responsible because he did not fulfill the first condition of morality, that he was not free. He had no freedom. Suppose, for example, at this point, had he decided with right intention that I want to fall here rather than here, could he have decided to do that? Of course not. So he fell on this point, was not his choice. He could not have done anything else. He simply did that. That's it. So in this case, he is not responsible because he is acting under a law of nature, which in this case happens to be gravity. Which in this case happens to be the gravity. So gravity, law of nature acts on everything. Suppose, for example, I am standing here right now, then every law of nature like gravity, friction, heat, thermodynamics, centrifugal force, every law of nature is acting on me as much as it is acting on this dais. In this sense, there is no difference between me as a human being and this dais as an object. When we act act under a law of nature, then we are acting essentially as an object. And for the object, morality does not exist. So in place of this person, had there been a stone of the same mass, that stone would also have killed this person. Do you think that stones are responsible for the death of the people? Of course not. So this person is no more responsible for the death of this second person than a stone. He is just like a stone. So there is no moral responsibility because there is no freedom in that case. So that is easy to understand for all of you. But Kantian freedom is not only about law of nature. Kantian free from the law of nature in a way. Kantian theory is more deeper, freedom. In order to understand freedom, let's take second example, which we had already taken in yesterday's class. Suppose this rich person A, he makes an unfair offer to this poor person B, that I will pay you only 100 rupees salary, whether he deserves 500 rupees. And this person is so desperate for the job that he accepts that offer and gives his consent. Remember that? So in this case, what do you think that a libertarian will say? That his act of accepting that offer is a free act? Is it a moral act? A libertarian will say it is a moral act because it is based on the consent. He simply made an offer, he accepted that, that's it, we don't have to go beyond that. But forget about libertarian. What do you think? Do you think that this person's act is a moral act, a free act in that case? Perhaps many of you may say that no sir, not. Kant will also say the same thing. Kant will say that his act of accepting the offer was not a free act. Why so? Because this person accepted this offer because of certain socio-economic condition, which in this case happens to be the poverty. Which in this case happened to be poverty. So he was so poor that he had no other choice but to accept that offer. So just as he found himself in a condition which made him to fall on the second person, killing him, similarly he found himself in a condition that where he had nothing else to do but to accept that offer. He did give his consent, but his consent was not a free consent. Freedom was not there even in that. This is what Kant will say. Many of you will agree with that conception of freedom in the Kantian theory also. But Kantian freedom is not only about that. Kantian freedom goes far than that also. So, in order to understand the deepest meaning of the Kantian theory, let's take the third example and last example. Suppose, for example, after 1 hour your class is over, and suppose your class is over and you go out into a drink shop and you are very exhausted, you are thirsty, you go to a shop of drink to have some, you can say, drink and all, and big shop is there, all the drinks are there. Suppose Coke is there, Pepsi is there, Sprite is there, everything is there. So a big shop is there where all the drinks are available. And you have enough money in your pocket also. Poverty is not a constraint. In the second case, poverty was the constraint. So now poverty is also not a constraint. So you look at all the drinks available there and you decide to take Coke rather than anything else. Then do you think that your act of choosing Coke in that case was a free act? Perhaps all of you will say it is a free act. You might say, oh, there is no force, there is no constraint, there is no poverty, there is no other thing. But even then, Kant may possibly say that your act may not be a free act. Why not? Here we can go to the core of the Kantian idea of freedom. What Kant will say here, that whenever we do something, then every human action has two components. One is the means and the other is the end. So in this case, Coke was the means. What was the end? Well, end was the thirst. So you did make a choice of Coke. So, but you made a choice of Coke because you were thirsty. Was that thirst your choice? Just as in the second case, you did give your consent, but you gave your consent because of poverty. Was poverty your choice? Did you decide to become poor? Of course not. So poverty was there and you have to force, that poverty forced you to accept an offer that you would not have done otherwise. Similarly, your body demanded you first. So thirst was not your choice. You did not decide to become thirsty. There was some bodily condition was there inside you. Your body demanded and you simply fulfilled that demand. It is something like this one. Suppose for example in Delhi, suppose you are in Delhi and I give you say I give you 1000 rupees and I tell you that go to Daryaganj and bring a book for me, a certain book for me. I give you name of a book and I also give you the name of the shop from where you have to purchase the book. And I give you the choice that you can go there by metro or bus and auto or bike, whatever comforts you, taxi, Ola, Uber, whatever. Go as however you want and bring that book for me. Now suppose you go there and you bring that book for me. Now in this case, do you think that your act of bringing that book for me was a free act in that case? Of course not. So in this case, you did choose the means that is most comfortable for you, but end was chosen by me. I decided the shop and the book. You decide the means, how to go there. So when you decide the means only, you are not a free person. So in this case, your act of bringing a book was not a free act. You acted like a servant, you acted like a slave. I was the master. I decided the end and you chose the means. So that is where freedom is not there. So in this case also your body is the master. Your body as a master demanded that, well, give me some water, and as an obedient servant you decided which form of water is the most convenient for you, most satisfying for your master, and you as an obedient servant, as a loyal servant, you fulfill the need. So that is what it is there. Just look at it, how different this theory is from Bentham's theory. Bentham will say that if you take a can of Coke, since you are thirsty, then do you think that that can of Coke, taking a can of Coke, was that a moral act? Bentham will say, yes, it was a moral act. Why so? Because it made you happier. Not only you, it made the shopkeeper also happier. He will make the sale. Not only shopkeeper, but everybody who is involved in the production and distribution of Coke. All the stockholders of Coke, laborers and share market, the truckers, the can maker, the ink maker, printers, transporters, truck makers, petrol refinery makers. Just think of it. Just in order to bring a can of Coke in your hand, well, how many people have made their contribution in that? So just by taking one can of Coke, you have made 1 million people perhaps happier. A small amount, but nevertheless you have made 1 million people happier. That is the reason that that utilitarians focus so much on consumption. Every time when you consume something, you make the world happier. So Bentham will say it was a moral act, but Kant will say that no, it was not a moral act. So that is what he will say. A few years ago there was a very interesting advertisement of Sprite I happened to watch somewhere. That all accents etc. was there, but at the end of a very interesting line was written, punchline. Punchline was, obey your thirst. Obey your thirst. Now, I don't know the person who wrote this line, the advertiser, the copywriter, was he aware of the Kantian theory or not? But this line expresses a very interesting insight about the Kantian morality. That when you take a can of Coke or a Sprite, for example, then you are not the master, you are obeying your thirst. Your thirst is your master. You are servant. And for servant, for slave, morality does not exist. Morality is only for the free people. So, when you choose the means, then your action is not a free action. Second case also the same thing was that consent was the means and poverty was the end. Poverty was the end. You did not choose to become poor, you chose to give the consent. So, when only you choose the means, not the end, then your act is not a moral act. This is what Kant will say. Now, Kant tried to find a word in European language to express all these things, but he could not find any such word. So, he invented a new word. As I told you, his books are full of the neologism and all. So, I will avoid all the technical terminology that he had used, but this new term we will use in our class here. So, write down further. In terms of freedom, there are two types of human actions. In terms of freedom, there are two types of human actions. In terms of freedom, there are two types of human actions. First one, heteronomy. First one is called heteronomy. Now, write down a few lines. Heteronomy means allowing the nature to control our actions. Allowing the nature to control our actions. Write down a few more lines. When our action is determined by those factors on which we do not have any control, when our action is determined by those factors on which we do not have any control, then we are acting heteronomously. Then we are acting heteronomously. Then we are acting heteronomously. In this, we do not choose the end of our action. In this, we do not choose the end of our action. We do not choose the end of our action. Thus, when we act under a law of nature, like gravity, When we act under a law of nature like gravity, that will remind you of the examples that we have discussed, comma, or some socio-economic condition like poverty, some socio-economic condition like poverty, or some biological condition like thirst, then we are acting heteronomously. A heteronomous act does not have any moral value. A heteronomous act does not have any moral value. So, all those actions that we have talked about, they are heteronomous in the sense that in those actions we do not choose the end of our action. Our action is determined by those factors like gravity, poverty, thirst, etc., on which we do not have any control. We simply follow the condition that in which we find ourselves in. So, such actions are called heteronomous action, and such actions have no moral value. Remember, they are not immoral act. They are only amoral act. So, heteronomous acts are amoral. I hope you remember the term amoral. In the previous class we had talked about that. So, if you take a can of Coke, then it is not an immoral act. It is just an amoral act. There is no morality into that. It is neither moral nor it is immoral. Neither it is right nor it is wrong in the moral sense. So, that is the first type of action. If it is not moral, what is moral then? Second one. Write down. Second one is autonomy. Second type of action is called autonomy. Now write down further. For Kant, freedom means autonomy. Freedom means autonomy. So, this is the next important thing. The idea here is that Kant will define freedom as autonomy in a way. But before we talk about Kantian autonomy, can you tell me what is the meaning of the term autonomy, by the way? In India, in polity, for example, we talk about autonomy of the state, autonomy, etc. What do you mean by autonomy in polity? Well, many students say, sir, it is independence, freedom, etc. No, autonomy has a special meaning in such cases. In India, autonomy, when we talk about that, then autonomy always defines a certain scope. Within that scope, the entity that we are talking about, it can take all the decision. It is only about defining a scope within which decision can be taken by the autonomous entity. Suppose, for example, in India we see in our constitution we have three lists of the subjects: central list, state list, or the concurrent list. Now, states in India are autonomous within the state list. So, they can make any law in a state. Your ability to make a law within a certain area is called the autonomy. So, autonomy word has been derived from two words, auto and nomy. Auto means self and nomy means law. Self-made law. When we act under a law made by ourselves, then we are autonomous in that case. When we act under a law that is made by somebody else, then we are heteronomous in that case. So, autonomy basically means being under the law of acting under self-made law. So, write down a few lines. Reason gives us the ability to go beyond the laws of nature. Reason gives us the ability to go beyond the laws of nature and make a law for our own action. and make a law for our own action on which we can act. Law for our own actions on which we can act. This uniquely human ability to make a law, for our own action, is called autonomy. In this, we choose the end of our action as well. Only an autonomous act can have a moral value. Only an autonomous act can have a moral value. Now, this is what we mean by autonomy. So, he said that we are all subjected to the law of nature, like biology, like gravity, thirst, etc. But we all have this ability that we can override the law of nature and make a law on which we can act. This ability of the human being, which is uniquely human, is what we call the autonomy, being the master of our own action rather than being the slave of something else. So, this is what he calls the autonomy. So, we will see some example of that shortly. But here I ask you to keep this line empty. So, in this case here you can write this thing: freedom, autonomy versus heteronomy. Autonomy versus heteronomy. Autonomy versus heteronomy. So, autonomous act will make your act moral and heteronomous act will make your act amoral. Now, what we say autonomy and heteronomy here, some other people, what he called autonomy and heteronomy, some other people also call that as free will, which they differentiate from determinism. Free will versus determinism. So, determinism means what? Determinism means that when our action is determined by those factors on which we do not have any control, that our action determined. Free will means that we can be free in our will to do something regardless of any other factor which is acting upon us. Now, if you look at determinism, then in history many different forms of determinism has been developed. The oldest form of determinism is, all of you are aware, is divine determinism. Religions believe in that. That religions say that everything that happens in the world, it happens because of the will of the God. God determines and everything happens according to that. So, if you believe in the revealed religion, for example, like Islam or Christianity, then God determines everything that is right, everything that happens. He reveals himself through a prophet like Jesus or Prophet Muhammad, and the word of the God is written in the Bible or the Quran. So, if you have to decide what is right, read your Bible, read your Quran, and that will guide you all the time. But that is called divine determinism. But Kant said that if you follow the Bible or Quran blindly, whatever it is written there, then you will become a great Christian or Muslim, or will not become a moral person, because your action will become heteronomous. So, we have the freedom to go beyond Bible also and decide what we can do. So, this ability of the human being to be free from the Bible or Quran also, maybe command of the God also maybe, is what calls autonomy. So, you can imagine how offensive this idea could be to the church, because church at that time claimed exclusivity of the knowledge. So every right and wrong must be in accordance with the church's doctrine and teachings. But Kant will say that no, you don't have to go to church to understand what is right and wrong. Sit quietly in your room and close your eyes and think what is right, and your mind itself will tell you. Innate ideas are there inside you. Morality is a part of that. So think about it and you will understand what is right in that case. So this is what Kant will say. That is how his idea was so offending to the religious people like the church in general. But otherwise, we can say many people talk about different forms of determinism. Further, like you can say environmental determinism. So the empirical philosophers believe that our action is determined by environmental factors around us, like our family, our schooling, our neighborhood, etc., culture, etc., etc. Or some people talk about the evolutionary determinism. People like, so environmental determinism are basically talked about by the empirical philosophers and more recently by the behavioristic psychologists like John Watson or B.F. Skinner. Evolutionary thinkers are people like Richard Dawkins or E.O. Wilson, etc. They say that human behavior is determined by the millions of years of evolution, and understanding that we can predict and control the human behavior. Maybe some people talk about biological determinism. Particularly neuroscientists, they talk about that our behavior is the result of the internal biological forces inside us, like neurons, hormones, neurotransmitters, etc., etc. So they talk about different forms of determinism. Kant is not against those people. Kant will say that okay, they are right, but he said, remember, he did not say that empirical philosophers are wrong. Only thing that he said here, that we all are subjected to these forces, but at any point of time we can decide to go against them, and we can decide, okay, my family or my culture, my environment has conditioned me to act in a certain manner, but at any point of time we can become free from that conditioning and decide, okay, I want to do this. This assertion of the I will do this is called free will. So we can always be free from any other forces of deterministic factor. Other thing that you can see here further, if you look at human behavior, then you know human behavior is often determined by three sources in a way. First can be the authority. Authority, religious authority like church, political authority like the king, or traditional authority like your elders, culture, etc. Second source of human behavior is experience. We experience something and then on the basis of that we determine what we decide what we have to do. And third is the reason. We think and then after we decide what we should do or not. Now all the Enlightenment philosopher, they rejected authority as the source of human behavior. They said authority cannot determine the human behavior. That is one thing they all rejected. But empirical philosophers said that experience alone determines our behavior. But Kant will say that if experience determines your behavior, then your behavior will become heteronomous, immoral act. And if your reason determines your behavior, then your behavior will become autonomous, a free behavior. Only then morality can exist. So experiential acts are not moral act, rational acts are the moral acts. This is what Kant will say. Now this idea of, can say, autonomy that Kant is talking about, it actually led to the development of today what we call enlightenment. Enlightenment. You know, enlightenment, that was the age, 18th century was often called the age of enlightenment. And since that time till today, we are living in the age of enlightenment. So enlightenment is an important word. What is the meaning of the term enlightenment? We must have heard this term very often. Age of enlightenment, age of reason. And Kant was the most important enlightenment philosopher. He was the person who actually defined enlightenment, that what is the meaning of enlightenment. In fact, he has written a small book also called What is Enlightenment? In that book, a small booklet maybe, so in that book he has defined what exactly is the meaning of the term enlightenment. And he gave a very beautiful, precise and concise definition of enlightenment. Let's talk about a little of that meaning of enlightenment. He said that enlightenment is the, and it is his definition, I am quoting him, he said enlightenment is the emergence of man from his self-imposed infancy. These two words are important one. So enlightenment is the emergence of man from his self-imposed infancy. Infancy. Infancy is what? Again I am quoting him. Infancy is the tendency of man to seek others' guidance. Others' guidance to take while taking moral decision. That is the meaning of the term infancy. So who are the infants or children? Well, children do not know what is right and wrong. So they always seek others. My daughter does not know what is right and wrong. Whenever she has a moral question, she comes to me and asks me, Papa, tell me what is right. And I tell her and she blindly follows that. Infants are they. He said that most of us, most of the time, suffer from similar infancy. We always seek others' guidance about moral decisions, sometimes church, guidance of church, Bible, guidance of the king, guidance of the traditional people in our society, cultural practice, norms, etc. So we often seek others' guidance while mirror. And when you seek a guidance of somebody else and act on that basis, you are an infant, you are a child. But this infancy that we suffer from is self-imposed. Why it is self-imposed? Because it is not because of this infancy that we are suffering from. It is not because of a lack of reason, but it is because of a lack of courage. Lack of courage to use reason. So this is an interesting thing. He said that we suffer from this infancy not because we lack reason. Children lack reason, because of that they seek others' guidance, but we have that reason in our mind. But so reason is not missing in us. What is missing in us is the courage to use the reason. So courage is something that is missing in us. So enlightenment, according to him, is not a function of knowledge. It is a function of courage. Knowledge is not missing in us. It is there. What is missing in us is the courage to use that knowledge. So enlightenment is a function of courage, not the function of reason, not the function of knowledge. It is already there. Only thing that we need to have is the courage. So further he said, again I quote him, he said that the motto of enlightenment is sapere aude, a famous phrase, that ancient Latin phrase, which was first used by Horace, the ancient Latin philosopher. But in modern philosophy, Immanuel Kant was the person who made this popular. Sapere aude. He says motto of enlightenment is sapere aude. What is the meaning of sapere aude? Sapere aude essentially means, in English we translate that as dare to think. Dare to think. Have the courage to think for yourself. Do not outsource the process of thinking to somebody else. Think for yourself. That is the meaning of the term enlightenment. So, if you allow somebody else, like the king, like the church, like the tradition, for example, to think on your behalf and decide your action, you are a slave of that thing. So, sapere aude or enlightenment means think for yourself. Have the courage to think for yourself. That is the meaning of the term enlightenment according to him. So, that is how he defined enlightenment, which is the central idea of the modern Kantian philosophy. Now, this idea of enlightenment Kant was talking about in the 18th century, as I told you. Almost 2200 years before Kant, there was a great philosopher in India who also talked about exactly similar idea of enlightenment. Can you tell me who that philosopher was? In fact, this philosopher's name itself is enlightened. I hope all of you must have got him. Well, he was Buddha. What is the meaning of the term Buddha, by the way? Enlightened one, the enlightened one. So, Buddha was also a person who talked about a similar enlightenment. So, let us talk about some ideas of Buddha. Some of you had told me that yes, we are not talking about the Indian philosopher. Yesterday I talked about Mahavir, today I will talk about Buddha. So, Buddha's enlightenment is similar to Kantian enlightenment that we are talking about today here. Now, about Buddha, all of you must be aware that, tell me one thing first of all, that when there is a very interesting story about Buddha, that when Buddha was dying, then just before he died, then well, all his disciples gathered. He died at 80 years of age when he had food poisoning, consuming pork. So, when he was dying, then well, all his closest disciples came to him, sat around him and asked him, Anand particularly, the most important of his disciple, Anand asked him that Mr. Buddha, not Mr. Buddha, Buddha, you are going, Now, so till now whenever we had some moral question, then we used to ask you for the answer. Now you are going, you are no longer the guidance that we have now. So tell me, after you, how would you live our life? How should we live our life? What is your last message that we can take up for the rest of our life? What is your last message? And then after Buddha gave him his last message. Can you tell me, anybody, what was the last message of Buddha? I hope that some of you may have heard about that. It is very commonly well known in our country. So last message of Buddha, Buddha said that my last message is Appadipo Bhava. Let me write that in Hindi. Dipo Bhava. So that was the last message of Buddha. Appadipo Bhava, be your own light. So Buddha told his disciples that now I am going, so let me go. Forget about me. Now onwards, be your own lamp. So I am going. Till now I was there, of course, but now I am going. Let me go. Forget about me now. And don't seek light in me. Now seek light in you. There is a light inside you. Appadipo Bhava, be your own lamp. So everybody. So in this sense, Buddha was very interesting philosopher. You know, because Buddha was very different rather than all other religious leaders in the world. Because every other religious leader like Jesus, Prophet Muhammad, etc., they showed us a path. And they told us, follow this path, you will reach the destination, you will get the salvation. Suppose, for example, you are a Christian, then according to Christian doctrine, in order to get salvation, you do not have to become Jesus. You don't have to become. Jesus was crucified. Jesus died for the sake of the sin of the humanity. So you don't have to become Jesus. Only thing, so Jesus showed you a path, just follow that path, you will get redemption. Similarly, if you are a Muslim, then you do not have to become Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad showed you a path, follow that path, and if you follow that path, then you will reach your destination, your redemption. Buddha did not do that. Buddha did not show us a path. He did not say that follow my path. He said only way to get redemption or moksha or nirvana, whatever you can say, is to become Buddha, not to follow Buddha. He said we all are capable of becoming Buddha. So when do we become Buddha? When we stop looking at guidance somewhere else, we become our own light. Enlighten, light must be in. So that light must come. Light is what? Guidance, the reason. That light must come from in. So this is what Buddha said, that be your own light, become Buddha yourself. Let me die now as a person and you become Buddha. Each of you are capable of becoming Buddha. Only then you will get the redemption. That is the ultimate goal. All of us are capable, all of us can become. That is what Buddha said in that. That is why you can say Buddha did not give any categorical answer to any question. Important metaphysical. Somebody asked him, for example, that Buddha, there is a God. He said, yes, you are right, there is a God. Next day somebody came and he asked him, there is no God. He said, yes, you are right, there is no God. He never gave a categorical answer whether there is God or not. He said, it's only you can decide. If you think that God is there for you, God is there. If you think that God is not there, God is not there. How can I answer for you? Each person has to answer his own moral question himself. Nobody else can answer moral question on behalf of somebody else. That answer will be wrong answer, that answer will be bad answer. My answer can be right only for me if it is based on my reason, my light, and your answer can be right only for you when it is based on your own light. You know, there is a beautiful saying in the Zen Buddhism. You know, Buddhism, when it went to China, it became Zen. And in India it was Dhyan or Gyan. In China it became Zen, and when it went to Japan, then it became Zen, Z-E-N, Zen. So there is a saying in the you can say Japanese Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, that if you see the Buddha, kill the Buddha. If you see the Buddha, kill the Buddha. That's a beautiful way to say the similar thing. What is the meaning of kill the Buddha? Are they asking us to kill somebody, murderer? No, kill the Buddha does not mean that you have to kill a person who is Buddha. No, Buddha is not a person. This saying basically means that whenever you see a source of, you can say, guidance outside, then somebody else trying to guide you about what is moral or not, then first thing that you should do is to kill that source and be Buddha yours. Kill the Buddha and become Buddha yourself. Only way to get enlightenment or redemption is to become the Buddha. So this is what he said, Apadi. So in this sense, I will say that Sapre Ode of Kant and Apadipo Bhava of Buddha are exactly the same thing. So they are sort of literal translation of each other. So what Buddha said 200 years ago, Kant is talking about the same thing, and our enlightenment today also means the same thing. That we should always be under our own self-rule. We should not allow anything else to control or determine our behavior. That is the meaning of the term enlightenment, free will or autonomy. So Kant will say here, so these three terms, autonomy, free will, and then finally enlightenment. Enlightenment, all the three terms are more or less same here. So there can be some question on any of these three terms. There can be some question, for example, write a short note on autonomy, or what do you mean by enlightenment, or is free will possible or not? Is free will possible for the human being? They often ask this question also. So in all these cases, you can see that our behavior is, this is what your answer should be, that our behavior is often determined by many external factors, like for example, well, God's command, or like environmental factors like our family background, like our cultural background, our neighborhood, our school, etc. So the people who talk about environmental determinism, they say that by studying the environment of the people, schooling, family, etc., I can make 100% prediction about how is it that this person going to behave. So we can make a prediction about that. We can understand human behavior by understanding, by studying the environment of the people. These people will say that we should try to understand human behavior by understanding the evolution. So evolution alone can help us to understand the nature of human behavior, all the human actions and all. So biological behavior, genetic determinism, unconscious determinism, many different forms of determinism has been developed by the people in the past. So in your answer, you can write all of that, well, our behavior often is determined by the religious authority sometimes, or environmental factors around us, evolutionary factors around us. In our past, maybe biological factors inside our body, our hormones, our, well, homeostasis, thirst, hunger, etc., sexual drive, for example. So, or sometimes authority, political authority like law, traditional authority, etc., like parents, like other things and all, or our experience, etc., biological experience, social experience, or other experiences. So all of these things often determine our behavior. But we all are capable of, as a human being, we all are capable of overriding all these factors and decide for ourselves that what is it that we have to do, what is it that we should do, what is it that we want to do. If we do so, then our action will become free action. Our action will become autonomous, free, and we will become enlightened in that. Only those actions which are determined by the individual self is the enlightened action, and that person who often does so will become an enlightened person. Morality is about enlightenment in the Kantian theory. We are moral only and only, we are free and moral only and only when we act autonomously, freely, and in an enlightened manner. So that is the meaning of the term freedom in Kantian theory, and that is how this idea of freedom is related to the enlightenment of Kant. So that is all about enlightenment, first important aspect. Now, second concept of Kantian theory that we have to talk about would be morality. After we choose your action, or you must choose your action autonomously, we should not allow anybody else to determine your action. But after that, you have to put a moral worth on that action. From where that morality comes up, that we will talk about in the second point here. The three parts of Kantian theory is there that we are going to discuss. Second will be the morality of that. But that morality aspect we will talk about in the next class. So in the next class, we will talk about what makes our action moral after autonomy. Autonomy is the primary condition. We must choose our action autonomously. Then after, we have to make that action moral also by a certain act. Let us see if there is any question. No question. So today we will leave at it now. In the next class, we will talk about morality and reason. Then after, we will talk about principles of Kant and its applications, and then after, we will also talk about the international relations, that how Kantian theory helps us to understand the international world order today. So we will talk about all of that in next class.